Project Motor Racing has been a failure across many different areas of sim racing, and in this video I'm not going to pull any punches because you deserve it. You are the people spending your hard-earned money on sim racing titles, and let's be honest, it hasn't been a particularly great year for sim racing. Now in this video here I'm going to show you lots of stuff that's wrong with Project Motor Racing. I'm going to show you what they need to do to fix it, but I'm also going to explain to you how we got in this situation where so many people are massively disappointed with this game. Now the clip on screen at the moment is actually me driving at 90% AI, and I'm pretty good at Project Motor Racing actually. I spent a lot of time in the game, but I shouldn't be overtaking cars like this, and it's going to get even weirder. We're going to talk about that in this video. But when I talk about a failure in sim racing, I feel like there's been a total systemic failure where we've ended up with a situation on launch day where people have bought the game, people have downloaded the game, for example, on PlayStation, and have had completely different experiences to their expectations, and generally not in a good way. And how can this be possible? How can it be possible when we have people like the Stig, Ben Collins, consulting on this game? How can it be possible when we have massive sim racing outlets these days who get invited to loads of preview events in Switzerland and at Silverstone, get time on with the game in Germany, and the game is the game, it hasn't changed that much? How can it be possible that the wider sim racing community is not well informed of the accurate state this game is, and people are wasting their money, their hard-earned money, going to work, earning this cash to spend it on sim racing, their main hobby, this little niche that we have that we need to protect, and we end up in a situation on day one where so many people are like, this is completely different to what I expected. I think it's unacceptable, and that's why I think it's a systemic failure. So obviously Project Motor Racing Straight 4 Studios, their marketing for this game has been completely wrong. In my opinion, this shouldn't be marketed at anything close to iRacing. This should be really marketed as something like, it's kind of Need for Speed Shift on steroids. It's basically like the old Project Cars games. It's going to be very weird to handle sometimes. You're going to need to spend a lot of time in the settings. If you have a PhD in force feedback, you might be able to get something that's drivable. But if you're just a normal person off the street, we don't have normally hours and hours and hours to spend in settings tuning things. The weekend before launch was different for me. Because I've got my young baby, I'm actually able to spend, ironically, more time at this moment to actually drive the game. And I've driven for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And I actually think there has been a bit of a failure. I would also say just in the reviewing of this game. Like, this is not a game you can review by spending only 2, 3, 4 hours on it. Ironically, for a game that in its marketing material refers to things like, you know, kind of being an iRacing experience, I don't think that's right. You couldn't review iRacing in just 2 hours. But let's get into it. What does Project Motor Racing need to improve? So firstly, I firmly believe that if you take the game of Project Motor Racing and you change nothing, you change literally nothing in it, and you had marketed the game differently, you would have a much better result on launch day. And by that I mean it has to be 100% clear to people that this is not a game where you can jump into a hypercar or a GT3 and do anything before the tyres are warmed up after about 2 laps. And that might sound obvious to hardcore sim racers or real world racing drivers, but that is not obvious to 90% of your player base. That is not obvious to anyone who's played Gran Turismo 7 for a long time and wants something a little bit more simulation focused. That is not obvious even these days, I think, in iRacing, where it's a lot more forgiving than it used to be when I started iRacing. So I think it needs to be made clear. And the frustrating thing is, Project Motor Racing say all this stuff online where, no offence, no one's going to read it apart from me. I've read the whole Project Motor Racing website, I've read all of the guides and all of this stuff, so I know that they know that they needed to let people know about this. But if it's not in the game, we're not going to read it. How many of us just throw away manuals when we get a new product? How many of us, let's be honest, we just want to get into the product? So here in the settings pages, in the setup pages, when you go on track, your engineer needs to be letting you know that your tyres are cold, you will not be able to drive this car at the moment. And I actually said this at the Sim Racing Expo in my video that came out that week. I said this game needs to explain to people how to drive on the tyres. Otherwise, you're going to come out, you're going to be on blue tyres, and it's just not going to work. A lot of people are not even going to pay that much attention to the tyre indicator. Again, at the Sim Racing Expo, I said this is maybe one of the most tyre dependent games I've ever played. Like, the tyres are everything in this game. But I 100% believe that if you buy this game or pre-ordered it, you are not going to know that. It's not that prominent anywhere, apart from there's a little graphic there that shows up amongst many other graphics on the game. So that's something that they absolutely need to do. So they can do that from now. They can do that very quickly. They can add pages into the game. They can say do not jump into a hypercar or GT3 until you've warmed up the tyres. I would actually go further, by the way, because I believe that the hypercar models and some of the GT3s are just not that good. And this is me having warmed up the tyres. They just don't handle correctly. There's a massive variance in the category. I would actually do a massively drastic step, and I would withdraw hypercars and GT3s from the game at the moment in their entirety and say we're going to work on this with the community, with the relevant people in the sim racing community, and we are going to get these right. We're going to take a load of feedback and then we'll re-add them in bit by bit when we're ready. And ironically, if this was an early access game, they probably could have done that. It's so weird to me that I feel Project Motor Racing has more cars, more hypercars and GT3s, it feels to me, than Le Mans Ultimate. It certainly has more in the base game. Le Mans Ultimate, you have to pay for a lot of them. And I feel like in Le Mans Ultimate, we're paying for them because we feel like they spent a lot of time developing them. It doesn't feel like that in Project Motor Racing. So that's a drastic step that I would do. Now, another thing I do that I don't think would be a massive change if they're telling the truth is on the AI, okay? Because they've consistently said that the AI is insane, and they've taught this up and up and up and up and up. And the whole linchpin of the single player experience resides on the AI actually being fantastic. Now, by all accounts, and I'll tell you my account, when you're driving against the AI, it feels like the AI don't really know you exist. Now, I can see a crack in the door because of my experience in karting. When I'm racing in Club 100, I'm racing against some of the fastest arrive and drive karters in the UK. If I try and do a half-assed move up the inside, they will pretend they haven't seen me, close the door, I'll end up making contact, I'll spin out, and because of the momentum, they'll carry on and I'll look like an idiot. That is the dark arts of karting, and I'll do exactly the same thing, by the way, if I'm in that position. I can see a crack in the door where they might say this is what the AI is doing. They're not going to give you easy passes. They're not going to move out the way if you've waved your nose up the inside. They will close the door on you and you will end up making contact. You will take damage to your car and they'll carry on. I think that's giving them too much credit, but there's a possibility that could be the case. In any event, if their AI is as sophisticated as they say, they should be able to give us sliders for the aggressiveness and other things we want to do to adjust the AI, and then we can tune the AI to our liking. Now, there's a big caveat here I'm going to get onto, but I feel as a first step we can tune the AI to our liking. We can make it a little bit more compliant. Some of us want to have more fun when we're racing AI. We want to start from the back. We want to feel like a hero. We want to be doing big sends. We want the AI to almost be scared of us. We want to feel like a G. Some of us might want that ultra realistic, this is what it would be like if I was, for example, racing people of the caliber of Club 100 drivers in the UK, where I'm going to have to really earn my overtakes. Again, I think they've misread the room here, because I think 9% of people want to kind of be rewarded if we have the skill and the gumption to kind of make a move up the inside. We don't want the door just closed on us. So I think they misread the room here. They made it too difficult. Now, I said there was a caveat. The caveat is this. It comes onto my third point. I have an uneasy feeling that Project Motor Racing felt a lot of this would be fixed in mods. By making the game moddable, I have a feeling that they wanted to rely on kind of free labour of modders to come in and fix these things. There's another game I reviewed recently called Recreation, where I had a similar feeling, where the game is so bare bones at the beginning and so many tools for creation. I felt like they were, they would be like, oh, in a year's time the modders will have added all the content. And that makes me uneasy, because I don't think games should be like this. And I also feel like it's uncertain, because if the game completely flops, it won't attract modding talent, and the modding talent won't be incentivized because there'll be no audience for them. So I hope that isn't the case, but I feel like it could be the case. And something that makes me uncomfortable there is there are a lot of unlicensed tracks in the game, like Monza, like Silverstone, and also all of the unlicensed sponsors on the cars, it seems to me it's skirting a little bit of a line, which is kind of fine. That's their prerogative. I don't think I'm going to get sued for calling Monza Brianza or something, but it makes me uncertain that, again, they seem to be saying to modders, oh, create, encouraging, maybe implying that modders can create, or not saying against it, that modders can create unlicensed content essentially, and therefore we're going to get a load of unlicensed content in the mod hub in the game that's going to be stuff that they couldn't add because it would be too expensive to get licensing. Don't know if I've made my point there clearly, but that whole thing makes me a little bit uncomfortable. And actually there's another thing with mods. So in the mod hub at the moment they have some setups, and I really hate the current situation with setups in sim racing, where it just seems to be overly monetized. Like when I was doing iRacing VRS every weekend, I had to pay for setups. I felt I had to pay for setups to be competitive. I know many of us will be in the same boat when we're doing iRacing fairly competitively. I hate the idea that we have to go to these third-party setup shops and add things, and it's all a bit opaque and we don't really know. I feel like the tools should be in the game to give you default setups and then explain to you how to change it. And to be fair to iRacing, you do get a lot of default setups in the game. You don't get default setups in Project Motor Racing. I don't get a safe setup. I don't get a qualifying setup. I don't get a setup that's just going to give me like 2 laps for qualifying fuel. I don't get a wet setup. And I feel like that, I don't want to say lazy, but I feel like that's missing. And I want to see that in games. And I feel like a game like this needs that on setups. Let's get to the force feedback now, okay? There's many conflicting views on the force feedback, whether we like it or not, okay? The prevailing view on the force feedback seems to be it's just rubbish, it's just pants. I disagree with that. I feel like when you warm up the tyres, the force feedback, it can be quite good. It does not help by some cars just seem to be broken, like pulling on the straights, pulling out of the pits. It just seems to be weird. There's some glitchiness going on there. But some cars, once you warm them up, feel really good, and you can have fun in this game. I feel bad for people who have bought this game, have pre-ordered this game, and are happy to take a bit of a punt on it, and their experience might be soured because they might be thinking that they're not having a good experience, even though I think objectively you can have fun in this game. And I also think with tinkering and with tweaking, there will be, and I will do my own force feedback setup guide and stuff like that, I think there will be a consensus at some point that actually you just had to kind of set it up to get the force feedback working. Now that's so variable. It may, I'm hearing bad things about T598 a lot of the time. I'm using it on a SimuCube 2 Pro, so I'm using some of the best hardware in the business. It should feel amazing, but I've been driving some races and it's felt fun. And by the way, it's felt SimCady. It's felt SimCady to me. When I'm driving these GT cars, this is the thing, right? Okay, when you're driving historic cars to me, that is inherently a SimCady experience, okay? Because I am not Jackie Stewart. I am not Fangio. I am not James Hunt. I'm not these legends from back in the day who were like gods, who would go to the green hell and who would defy death and sometimes die. Like, I'm not like these drivers. I wouldn't be able to drive those cars. Things like Group B rally cars, Formula 1 back in their day, the Le Mans monsters. Everything since then has been regulated for safety and to tame these cars and to control them. But we had a period back in the day, before my time, where the cars were just like out of control and the drivers were heroes. So I shouldn't be able to really drive these cars that easily, but in Project Motor Racing I can. And there's no ABS, there's no traction control, it's all on like authentic, there shouldn't be any. And I can actually drive these cars, and I can drive them quite easily. And it's fun. They're the most fun cars to drive. And I feel like a G, and I feel like a hero at the Nordschleife. And the irony is, when I go to the hypercars and GT3s, and I have driven a Ferrari 488 GT in real life, so when I drive these cars in the sim, these cars should be easy to drive. Maybe the hypercars less so because of the ABS, but the GT3 should be relatively easy to drive. I can tell you that as someone who's driven the Ferrari 488. Jimmy Broadbent can tell you that, who's someone who's driven these cars and who's racing a GT4. So can Steve Brown. That we can't be silenced anymore as YouTubers, because we actually go out on track and drive these cars. I've driven at Silverstone a variety of cars on this circuit that you're seeing right now. Like, I know how cars handle on this. I know that they're relatively easy to drive. You've got to think, these cars, a lot of them nowadays, essentially are designed for gentleman racers to drive. Because gentleman racers pay the fees, pay the entries, pay for the junior drivers. That's what makes this go round. I've been to plenty of GT rounds across the world. I've interviewed the drivers. They're amazing people, but then they're business people. They didn't grow up racing, okay? And that's absolutely fine. And therefore, that's why GT3 racing, I think, is also so popular in sim racing. Because it's a category that a load of us could drive GT3s in real life. Like, we could get there. We could do it, I'm telling you. But I would never be able to drive the Mazda 787B, I don't think. So this is a big contention I have with the game, that I think that the GT3s and hypercars should not be in the game. They confuse things and they should actually be removed. Now here's another change I would make. I would make it mandatory, so when you boot up the game, and I'm pretty sure Need for Speed Shift used to do this, if I remember, but I'm pretty sure when you boot up the game, your first race should be in a certain combination, and I think that combination should be Mazda MX-5 at Lime Rock Park, and you should be racing AI, and it's a great introduction to the game because the Mazda is a really safe car in the game. For me, it's much more boring than iRacing, by the way, the Mazda MX-5. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree, but I think the Mazda MX-5 should be the starting car in the game, and it should be like, great, you can drive a Mazda MX-5. Then I think it should put you in a hypercar on cold tyres, if the hypercars aren't removed, or some other beastly car, and it should be like, right, now drive this. And all of us should be dropping it out of the pits, because we're going to drive it like the Mazda, and then the engineer should be like, you thought it was like a Mazda? No, these cars are at the highest level of motorsport. The hypercars are maybe quite difficult to drive, or like the 787B is like very difficult to drive. You're not going to be able to drive this yet. Let's go back into the paddock. Let's get you started in racing. Let's get you driving in like, I don't know, like the Porsche 994 classic car, or like maybe a GT4 or something. And then we're going to build you up the ladder. And it should be that these hypercars and stuff are the pinnacle. I feel like when I go into Project Motor Racing, I see all the G3s and hypercars. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll jump in these, I like these cars. And it just doesn't really work. So you can see in this video so far that I'm saying a lot of things that are just explaining the game differently to players, rather than just fundamentally changing the game. Like, I think you can explain it. I've spent so much time in the game. By the off chance that I had the time available over the weekend, one weekend before I was driving in Jimmy Broadbent's 23 Hours on iRacing, so I would not have been able to spend any time in the game. But having spent a lot of time in the game by chance, it is fun once you get into it. I've done races where the races have been dynamic and it has been fun at the end as the tyres are getting hot and I'm trying to manage them. I've won a lot of racing in Project Motor Racing by managing tyres, both offline and online. But I think so many people are not going to get into that. And ironically, there's probably people out there who bought the game on a physical copy who don't read the internet, which these days is quite a good thing to do, especially what I see on like Twitter and stuff these days. And they're probably playing the game at their own pace and actually having a fun time. But the noise now in Project Motor Racing is so overwhelmingly just like chaos. Anyone who's tapped into that, I don't think is going to be able to experience the game. And I'm going to have to try and... I don't need to, because I'm not paid by Project Motor Racing. I'm not paid by Giants. I haven't received a penny to make content on these games, other than what YouTube pays me for adverts and whatnot. And by the way, I don't even want to do YouTube adverts. I think whenever I'm on a PC that doesn't have YouTube Premium, it is such a pain with the adverts. I would love to swap to some like Patreon model where there's no adverts in the videos, but I do a Patreon instead or something, but I need to think about that. There's so many thoughts. Playing so much Project Motor Racing has given me so many thoughts about sim racing in general and kind of how we're going to push sim racing to the next level. Why can't sim racing be massive? Why couldn't we have a game like this that comes out and it's kind of like Battlefield 6? Racing games used to be huge. Racing games used to be some of the biggest games. And they're not now, and it's like no one's noticing. Like we're niching down, we're niching. We're not capturing, I don't think, the wider audience as much. And if you're a casual player and you jump into this, I don't think it's explained well to you in the game how this game works. And I think it should be a simcade game that's like, but it's not going to be like Gran Turismo. If you try and drive like Gran Turismo, you're going to have to learn some techniques, and that should be part of the journey. So it's been a pretty mad video this. I've got a lot of suggestions for the team. Put all your suggestions in the comments below because I'm sure they'll be watching. And I just don't know whether to make more content on Project Motor Racing or not, because you know, I've got a bit of time at the moment and I want to be making the best videos I can, and I want to be helping the most people I can, and I feel like if I do a Logitech RS50 guide for ACC, that's probably more useful than doing maybe Project Motor Racing. I don't know, I've got to work it out. But let me know what you think in the comments. A lot of stuff in this video. Make sure to subscribe as well, obviously, and I'll see you in the next one.